does the industry need to place certain metrics around data segments so that on the front end, the advertiser, can have enough information to evaluate and distinguish for example, a audience science travel segment from an XLA travel segment? Or should we let the marketplace ultimately decide that? And where does this fall currently, and how do we see this developing over the next couple of years?
Yeah, I mean, I think data is following almost identically what we've seen with inventory. When Collective got in the business, we thought there was a gap in the ad network landscape and trying to build a product that really brand advertisers felt comfortable with and required a level of association with high quality publishers, but never selling on a site-specific basis, never disclosing on a reporting standpoint on a site-specific basis, selling audiences versus sites, a very clear delineation about what we did versus the publishers. I think that's exactly happening with data today. When we looked at the data landscape as well, we wanted to partner with disclosable, high-quality data providers, whether it was demographic segmentation, psychographic segmentation, search segmentation, in-market buyer segmentation or purchase intent segmentation. We wanted to make sure we associated ourselves with reliable, high integrity data providers, but again, keep the level of anonymity with how we actually packaged it and processed it. Because I think what's the most interesting thing about where we're headed with a high quality list of data providers is really how you package it and really create that value that is differentiated. I don't think it's easy to standardized data segmentation, which there's been talk about, because each and every one of us that are trying to create value no differently than ESPN is trying to create differentiated value with their editorial content versus their direct competitors in the content landscape. Each and every one of us in the data landscape are trying to do the same thing, but still requires high quality transparency, high quality data sources to do that well.
Well, yeah, they also everybody seems to define engagement differently. I don't know how, and that's both good, and there are pros and cons to that.
Alan, and to add to what Joe just said, another challenge, obviously you want that differentiation, you want new markets new players to be able to enter and evolve the space. But there's another play in this also, and that is third-party analytics, which of course benefit from some kind of standardization, some kind of alignment at least, even if it's not the traditional metrics. You would still want this industry to move towards something that allows for third parties to look at and validate some of the results that the proprietary operators are putting forward.
I think it's the agony and ecstasy of where we are, which is we're swimming in data. Yeah. There are companies that have distinct competitive advantage with data. They want to keep that. It's not in their interest to commoditize it, to share. I think there should be a framework. I think the stuff that the IAB is doing is important. I expect the large data companies to come in and use some of the rigor that they have done historically over the last 20 years and bring that online. I think it's going to take a little while to work itself out on what data is valuable and what's not.
So that's a great question. I mean, how long is it going to take for this to work itself out? Are we talking a year or two? Are we talking 5 years?
Longer.
Longer?
Well,
Longer than 5
I think
years?
5 to 10. I think, one, we've got to get the regulatory environment in a stable place. There was an article today saying that marketers are concerned about behavioral. They see the value of it, however, they don't want to.
Yeah, the challenge with that particular report, though, Ramsey, is it surveyed something like 35 ad execs. So I'm not a statistician. I don't pretend to have a methodological background, but 35 people is difficult to draw any meaningful distinctions from.
Yeah, no question. It's a point in time.
Yeah.
I think we all understand the regulatory environment is a little unstable right now, and I think there's a gap. Part of that gap between media consumption by consumers and the spend is in part due to all the data that's out there and concern about the regulatory framework.
So I agree with you completely. The only thing I would say, though, is if we're going to wait for the regulatory environment to settle, we're going to be waiting a long time. I think that we all should get comfortable with the fact that this is going to swing back and forth for the next number of years, and we have to be very comfortable in living in uncertainty.
Well, I mean, we're 15 years plus in the ad network landscape. We still haven't figured out inventory monetization, inventory disclosure, whether or not you can or cannot report down to the domain level what an advertiser agency is buying. So data, we're just at the beginning, and inventory scrutinization isn't subject to the same rigor and standards that the FTC, the IAB is putting forth, the self-regulatory bodies are putting forth right now. So I think we're all being even more careful in trying to address this. But we do have the benefit of hindsight. We've gone through a lot of these iterations relative to inventory, so hopefully we can apply a lot of it to where we're headed with data, and really the combination of data and inventory, which I think really is going to be a lot more insightful and a lot more beneficial to everybody involved in the, in the landscape.
Yeah, I mean, I think from a display perspective, you talk about, spending the last 10 years at least optimizing for search, and search is very efficient now, and I would say that CPC is a pretty efficient cost or pricing mechanism. I think display is a long ways from that, and that opens the door, because there's so much inefficiency for the leveraging of all sorts of different data on, this huge, giant expanse of undifferentiated potential inventory. And I think, the challenge is, how do you get from this broad CPM metric, which is, packages in a lot of inefficiency, non-viewable impressions, to something that's closer to a CPC metric, which, people feel comfortable with and can back out. And I think that could be engagement-based.
Yeah, I mean, I would actually add, and you'll probably touch on this, George, as well. I mean, I think it's not just a problem with contextual or inventory transparency or data transparency on marketers determining when and how they're going to use it. It's really, we're not tracking and reporting on the core metrics that are going to sway brand advertisers to spend on display or video or whatever online has to offer. I mean, I sat with Justin Evans briefly from Nielsen, and he said, we could just simply report on demographic and regional information, so they could actually plug in display in their marketing mix at the end of a month, at the end of a quarter, to properly determine what fair share display should get. That could be beneficial. If we could actually do a statistically significant sample with the home scan panel, not just relying on 100,000 users to do that, and millions of dollars to try to get it down to a product level, but get a panel that's large enough that we can actually do this, consistently, so they can actually gauge the effectiveness of their spend on offline sales or attitudinal data on a consistent basis. Really, that's what's holding it up. How do you measure it in a way, not just how you're targeting it, but how do you evaluate the value of that targeting compared to other media? So it's like, again, combination of targeting and metrics that are still a huge gap.
I tend to agree. I mean, I know that the regulatory landscape, et cetera, is sometimes not helping, but I think it's a whole bucket of things. So if you had more clarity on the metrics, et cetera, I think there'd be more clarity on other aspects of it, and it's sort of like a domino thing. And I think it is going to happen, but Ramsey's probably right. We're probably farther away than we would like to think, living in a digital universe.
It's funny, again, talking about data, talking about inventory, and we're still sitting here with, we're about to release our third annual display advertising study, and still everybody is looking at click rate and cost per clicks, because that still happens to be the only standardized metric that's consistently available in the landscape. Let's focus on a better metric that we can focus on whatever we're selling in this market. We're going to get a lot farther along in this sector.